off you go.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. And there's my little share button there. I'll talk a little bit about the sort of the format that I'll go through first to come as we're moving through things as well. I will end up doing a bit of an introduction to working in the arts. There's a lot of things to see in visuals, so I'll give you some context for that in a bit and how that connects to the research that I do. I'm going to go through a lot of projects. Some of them are my own, which I can get more in depth with, which really touch on the topic of um, ethics, migration, uh, requiring people to be have change their relationships with place quite a bit. Being a little bit wider there because you'll see, hopefully, you'll see in a few of the examples and the approaches different aspects of that. I'll also highlight some work. I'll even start with some work related to a project within a project, next nested projects through collaborators and colleagues to sort of frame that up also so that it's not just me. At one point in thinking about what how to spend our time, I wanted to try and bring together a number of people, scheduling wise, logistics wise, trying to make it work. Always tricky to do that. But luckily, we've been able to get support to be able to create documentation. And I might point you to some of that if there are other resources that you might find interesting. Really, the goal becomes about how might these become jumping off points for what you want to accomplish, whether or not you specifically want to do it as an art project, or you might otherwise want to integrate sort of that arts-based approach or a research creation type of approach where you're using art, creative practice, whether or not it's your own or through community, to advance understanding, mutual understanding, to explore a topic through ways other than writing, or sometimes what we oftentimes think of when we think of research and reports coming out of that. So if you're not working within the arts right now, it might seem like, what is this going to necessarily have to do with me? But I think that a lot of it does. So I'll go through. I'm going to turn it over first, turn it over in a video in a moment to a colleague of mine that I work with quite a bit, Taiwo Afalabi, who's a professor at Regina, who works a lot on this topic. And through a collaboration, we had worked on a project called the Department of Utopian Arts and Letters, which I'll come back to actually a couple times, or refer to it a couple times with that. And I'll move, and then I'll come back to actually myself in an effort to sort of decenter, not just make it about my own work. And then as we go through and go through some of those projects, a lot of the topics that were flagged in terms of how we work with place and then what are the agreements and the ethics associated with that, I think and I hope will be able to come up, even as the projects might have a similarity in their sort of aesthetic and their approach as a practice, that being able to take a look at them and what the sort of relationships that they're unearthing, even if there has a commonality there, will be useful to take a look at. And then as we get through towards the end, we're going to look at a little workshop. I'm going to close this out or come closer to the part where I will stop speaking as much with a short film that I think is directly related. It's existed for quite a while, and I use it quite a bit as an example of thinking about place and haunting and that sort of like separation from place. And then we'll have a little bit of an exercise. What we'll do with the exercise, one, I won't say too much about it, but also two, because we'll see one where we are at that, and it has specific goals. I'm not going to give it spoilers. There may be some sharing, there may not be some sharing. It's not going to be something that's required to do, but I was thinking of this more as more participatory. So there is a participatory element towards the end, and we'll get there. And I think I'm just making it more mysterious than it necessarily needs to be to start with. So let me make sure that I've got us set up correctly here. I've been able to there. And I want to make sure I'm sharing sound. That's a very key part of that as well. Okay, so I'm going to, and you should see a screen now. Oh, that's right. I do need to do this.
Yes, we can see it.
I need to change the way that my microphone's working so that you'll be able to actually hear everything as well, even though I've said that over. So I've referred to this as recalculating route, which is a reference that I make a lot. A lot of the work that I do, and I'll be getting into this, I'm not going to talk at you too much about it right now, is around place, and especially the way that stories are biased through the way that they're set up, the infrastructures that go with them, and then what isn't seen. There's a a very specific project that we'll get to, which is all about the idea of restoring land, which is the idea that the relationships that we have to a place and the way that we are in relation. It sounds the same. I'm trying to say, not to say how we use the land, but how those resources come to us, and those relationships have stories associated with them. And we tell those stories through also the way that we set up, that we have people perform those places. And understanding that many people might not be coming from a performance studies area. When I'm talking about performing a place, something like our the way that we program space, the way that roads cut through the landscape, where we put power or don't, where we put data infrastructure or not, dictate the ways in which we bias the way that we interact with those spaces when we decide something is wild versus urban, that those differences may not be may not be the natural order of things of art. And that's what a lot of the work that I'm interested in and that I also do ends up being about. So as I promised, I'm going to start actually with a video. We're going to watch roughly 8.5 minutes of it to get us into it. I understand that's a bit. It's going to do a couple of things. It's going to accomplish at least two things, I hope. One, it's going to give a brief introduction, or at least create some curiosity around this project called the Department of Utopian Arts and Letters, which I will explain more explicitly once we're done with it. And also introduce you to Taiwo, and specifically a project that came out of that project. There are 13 of these modules that came out of it, which are all freely available. So if you're interested in looking at them after we talk today, you'll be able to do that. I'll direct you in the right place for it. But specifically talking about routing, routing, as opposed to routing, and routing. So routing as in the way that I have it here, where I'm saying route, that's the default way in which I pronounce it, and also it can, in the alternate pronunciation of rooting, and then also rooting. And I'm pronouncing it differently, mainly because in working at this, I'm usually making that differentiation between it, so pronouncing it so that that's a little bit more audible in that. But I think it's an important thing to talk about. So right off the bat, not going to make it all about me. I'll get into Taiwo's video introducing his dual course right now. And like I said, we're going to watch about 8.5 minutes of it. I've got a timestamp to stop it at. Here we go. So if you can't hear, let me know.
In September 2015, I packed my bags and then off I headed to Victoria, Canada, to start my graduate program. It was an interesting move on many fronts. The fact that I had my theater company back in Nigeria and I had to not put it on hold, but I created a system where the work could continue without me. But beyond that, I had to move from the realm of the space of known to the unknown. New culture, new people. Of course, it was a room for growth, the desire to know more, the desire to do more, the desire for something more. In my case, the reason to move was voluntary. My name is Taiwo Falabi, and I am going to be walking you through this part of the Department of Utopian Arts and Letters Dual on the topic I'm calling immigration and mobility. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on roots, R-O-O-T-S, and R-O-U-T-E-S, roots. I left my root, R-O-O-T, to forge a new route, R-O-U-T-E, and has landed me to being here. In this course, we're going to be talking about what does it mean to leave, to go to what the unknown. But beyond that, we want to dive into what does it mean to leave something behind, particularly when we leave as immigrants, as international students. And more we know that the world we find ourselves means that we have to move for whatever reason or reasons. There is a part of us that we leave behind. and there's a piece of us that go with us. So we're going to be exploring different questions around what we leave behind and the piece of us that go with us. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the realities of immigration, the processes that we have to go through to arrive a place. But the arriving is not only it's just the beginning of these roots, R-O-U-T-E. What's the process of becoming and ultimately belonging? Do we even belong? The journey of going to a new place, the journey of becoming, what are the lessons that we can derive from that? Furthermore, we would explore the twists and the turns of navigating new environments, the nuances, the invitation that is new culture or new cultures or new encounters invite us to take on, but also the caution and the repercussion of the things we have to let go in order to truly and fully embrace. I invite participants that would take on this course to think about some of these questions. What would you need to leave behind? What do you even need to take along to a new place? How would you integrate into this new culture? Would you even be able to integrate? How would you create a community? And by community, what does that even mean? There is a scholar that wrote a book titled Imagined Community. In the book, Anderson talked about the fact that in recent times, the notion of nation state, the notion of the geography of a particular place is something we need to take a step back to reconsider. In fact, he talked about the idea of imagined community as sort of these borderless communities where people of like minds, we shared community based on language, based on identity. And so it's not just about the physical space, nation states, but rather it's become an imagined communities that bring us together based on the various features and identities that connect us. So the two ideas, roots, R-O-O-T-E-S, and roots, R-O-U-T-E-S, they're really exciting, interesting rather, two metaphors that connote two interesting ideas. Root, R-O-O-T-S, has been a symbolic metaphor for place attachment in different cultures. It is a part of metaphorical system that refers to people's link to place, the soil, the land, water, territories, cultures, and even practice. It also, to some degree, signifies the emotional bonds with the physical environment, space, place, and often contain the notion of local community, place-based, as it were. Shared culture, and at times natural identities. In fact, recently, some scholars and authors have suggested that the relationship between place, people, and culture may also be thought of in terms of roots, R-O-U-T-E-S, which brings us to the second metaphor of root. Think about it as a map, as a pathway, a way on a journey, a pathway to get to a particular place. So while R-O-O-T-S is gives us the idea of stability in a place. The idea of ROUTES gives us this idea around mobility, movement. According to Stroud Hall, another profound scholar, Hall did propose that the idea of identity is not as transparent or unproblematic as we think. In fact, it suggests that perhaps instead of thinking of identity as an already accomplished fact, which the new cultural practices then represent, we should think of identity as a production, never complete, always in the journey of becoming. How does this idea of ROOTS and ROUTES connect with Benedict Anderson's idea of imagined communities? The movement.
The video's not supposed to restart. There we go. Sorry, that is the moment at which we're gonna do that. If you do want to see the rest of that, similarly with you want to these are pages actually from within the accompanying workbook for it. This is a project called the Department of Utopian Arts and Letters. It commissioned ultimately 13 quote-unquote courses. They're all open source, so if you'd like to integrate them into something that you're doing, you're welcome to. All of the materials in it too, because it was done as an arts project, it was funded through the Canada Council for the Arts as opposed to necessarily as an academic or a research project, and as such was put out there into the world as an arts project that also has the rights associated with that it points to. Any of the resources in it were also biased towards those that would be freely available to someone who might not have access to other more academic sources. But I pulled up the cover page here. Like I said, there's 13 of them. They're each by an artist. Some of them are academic and teach, and some of them are not. Taiwo's happens to be one. He's a theater maker, also a thinker as well. I put up about half of the, 6 of the artists that are here, ranging from Aisha Leslie Bentham all the way on the left-hand side, who's talking about intergenerational memory and food and cooking. Christina Wong, who does solo performance work, usually comedic, recently up for a finalist for a Pulitzer Prize for her individual show, Christina Wong's Sweatshop Overlord, which talks about the community aid organization that she did when all of her performance gigs were canceled as a result of COVID-19, and creating something called the Anti-Sewing Squad, which ultimately organized thousands of people around mutual aid work during the pandemic, especially in the Los Angeles area. Etc. We have a Sunita Fezzik, who's an Ottawa-based poet, talking about peasant futurities. Jen Cole, talking about conversations with one's mother. She's a scholar at Peterborough. Julia Havrid, talking about crypt glam, and then slow play writing with Marilyn Nunez, who's a PhD candidate here at York as well. And each of these courses are an idea where an artist was prompted with the idea of thinking about something of a utopian idea past our current crises, and then creating the syllabus or how they might encourage somebody to get past that. So each of them have at least one introductory video. Some of them are split up. They each have a workbook as well that you can go through resources as well, or in each of these topics, and they're available. I'll provide the link when we get to the end now, but each of those 13 are available. They're free. You can complete them at your own pace, do what you want with the information, etc. But I thought that it would be a good one in particular to start with, because it does get to this idea. I oftentimes think about calculating route RUTE because I do a lot of work with geolocation and using technology as it connects with place and the way that we find our ways around place. Right now, just to give you a little bit of an introduction around who I am, I do primarily work as an artist, primarily within performance, primarily as a designer, primarily doing lights and video design, but all sorts of different things, sometimes in theaters and sometimes outside of them. So you can see sort of a selection of different projects that I've been involved with here. I'm also a parent. I have 2 kids. They're older than they are right here. That's my son when he was about 1.5 years old, sitting at a tech table with me. He will be 11 on Sunday. I'm based here in Toronto, traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee Wendat and the Métis, where the current treaty holders are the Mississaugas of the Credit. I'm originally from Los Angeles, with this Chumash and Tongva land, and do a lot of work in California still, primarily up through Ohlone, Pomo, and Onotsatese territories, which actually we'll get to in a little bit as well. But I've always been sort of fascinated. My family, at least on my dad's side, were colonists, like literal colonists. They came to what is now North America, or referred to as North America, as Scottish farmers, under decree from Scotland in 1725. So if I knew the date, we'd be looking at trying to figure out what happened in the last 300 years for that. And then, so the connection to place there is interesting. I also now do a lot of work in Scotland, and explore those routes as well, and thinking about that sort of migration over that time as well. I teach at York, teach in theater. I do teach production, so lighting, video, etc. I teach in our devised theater course as well, which is where we're creating our new original work. And my research is around primarily sustainability and the arts. And this is related to sustainable development, ecological concerns, etc. A lot of this manifests in then the work that I create, which I mentioned often has to do with place, and also sort of mixed reality technology, some of them sort of placed here in different ways. Where I sort of frame the work that I do, and it's a useful thing to jump from what you might be thinking of if you're thinking about the way that production processes work within theater, which is a fairly linear, goal-oriented process where you're going from pre-production, you're planning a project, you produce it, you make everything, and you put it in front of an audience, and you sort of treat it as done at that point. It will run for however long it runs as a performance. And at some point it will be deconstructed and decommissioned, and that's the end of it. I and a number of my colleagues put ourselves into what friend and colleague Tanya Beer, who's excuse me, I had a nut bar while we were taking a break, and now there's maybe a little bit of almond dust tickling the back of my throat. So Tanya had put into great words this idea of the ecoscenographic framework, which is taking more of a co-creative, celebratory, and circulatory, are the words that are used in it, where we move our production process and think about that more as co-creation, both within the context of our human collaborators, where we're already collaborating, and then thinking about the way that we use materials and the way that we interact with space is also a co-creative. There's a level of agency. There's a way that we're told or informed how to do that. And it's not in an abstract way, it's actually guided by communities, materials, etc., in which we are sort of decentering ourselves and our biases towards each of those in that process, not trying to impose upon them. It then reframes the way that we present art, not as the final goal of what we're trying to create, especially in performance, but as a collective celebration that we can work together, because then everything that we use from materials, just like baseline materials and resources, we want to look at them in terms of as circular economies, circular ways of working, etc. That those become resources, the ideas, the relationships to the physical materials become things that are then useful in our next cycle of doing this. And we're trying to look at sort of a cyclical way of approaching, exploring the world through artistic practice and creating performance. My own interest oftentimes is then about also revealing, as I mentioned before, how things change over time, how different infrastructures influence it. Part of that is like, I'm going to show a few different examples of this, but the way that we might look at environmental change. And so this is where I get into a lot of sustainability, is that how do we, through human geography, understand our relationship to place. So this is Eve Mosher's high water line. She used a base chalker that you'd use on a baseball field or a soccer pitch, etc., to line things, such as for striping fields with chalk, to remap the future high water line of Manhattan. Or Michael Pinsky's plunge, which put these halos around monuments throughout London to show where that might affect in the future. And almond dust is going to get me. That's still on. As these maps come by, they're sort of showing where some of this work happens. And as they progress, you might see that they are telling different stories of Specifically, I'm looking at the lower 48 states because I can have comparable maps for each of these as they move through, where we're looking at first the way that indigenous communities have organized themselves around resources, and then the way that highway system works, power system works, up until this point at which we're not even looking at a map anymore. Once we get to this image, this is a visualization of a day's flights in North America from some point in the past. I don't know the specific date, and you can start to see population hubs to the point at which now a lot of our infrastructure is more like this. This is an ongoing project around mapping the surface level of the internet, where it's showing the nodes and that. So we've gone from a very like land-based understanding of how we organize resources in the community into something that's very abstract. So I want to get into a few projects that look at this, and I think that the auto advancing might. Does it come in here? Oh, thank you. The auto advancing should stop at this point. So what does that look like in the type of work that ultimately in the projects that I end up getting involved with? So this is a project called Ascension. It was a project for the 2010 Coachella Music Festival in Indio, California. And this is a very, and the why I sort of start with this is one, it's large and sort of interesting to look at, but then also it gets to a very practical way in which we're talking about our relationship to land, right? So this, as I mentioned, is large. Go ahead, slide, go ahead, there you go. It's about, in metric, we're going to say about 50 meters, about 150 feet from each of its wingtips for it is in the style of an origami crane. It's made out of truss. Aluminum truss and various custom created members, and then covered with a shade fabric called textiline. In this case, 70% textiline, which if you've ever seen like a shade sail at a park or something like that, it's that material, sort of a plasticized, translucent material to provide sun cover. And it's large. It's being installed in a desert valley, which has large temperature swings. So it has a structure tied to it as well. Oh, there we go. Where there are, here you can see the various guy wires and things like that. So that has to be anchored. It had to be anchored, I think we had like 9 feet into the ground because of potential hurricane force winds and the temperature exchanges in this place. We also spent a lot of time because it's large and you'll see in the pictures provides in a very open area. One of the few sources of shade, sun study throughout the entire day. And then also because I was working on it primarily as a lighting designer, looking at then how we can illuminate the structure as well. Part of this became an example because once we get to this, which is where it's actually built, all that environmental analysis for months and months was done ahead of time because the first time that this could be created was when it was actually being installed just because of its size. There's not a lot of places that you can put it to try it out. You have to put it in situ to start with. And so a lot of planning has to go in. Now, one thing, and if you haven't seen the project before, you don't know it's there, but this darker spot back here is actually the solar array, I'll come to the other side, that provides power for it. So there is also an understanding of the resources that are here because it had to work autonomously from the rest of the space that it's in, right? And so this becomes this practical idea of thinking about how do we start to work with place. Here we're doing in a very, we're approaching it from an engineering perspective where we're looking at its relationship to temperature, sun, etc. Very practical elements. But these are also ways that end up telling stories in which we are creating an artistic project in which we are taking those very specific engineering things and we're doing something that is not necessarily for efficiency. It's not to accomplish a goal. Like our main charge from the promoters of the concert, the organizers of the concert in this situation was to affect the skyline. That's what they wanted. They wanted something large that would be over people. And we had the priority in creating in the ways that we created it and sort of those features for it. But it starts to talk about this relationship between the way that we marry the engineering that we do of a project, the way that we design it, aesthetically and through its construction process, and then the intrinsic relationship that has to happen, that has to be thought of with where it's working. Another project that also integrated solar, I'll start with the solar here, was here in Toronto. This is now 10 years ago, but it was at the Harbourfront Centre. So if you've been down to like the park space there, you might recognize this building, which is right across from the sort of open campus area. What you're seeing here is this is a former hydro utility trailer here in Toronto that would go around and have tools in it and that. But it's been converted to the Courtright Conservation Center into a mobile solar generator that's full of batteries as well. Inside this tent also that you're seeing here next to it, our number of batteries, actually I'll go back a slide for a second, is that you can see some solar panels on the ground here in the lower right, and they are charging these batteries inside. Now what this is for for a production called Vox Lumen, which was a dance show about an hour and a half long that performed for a weekend at Harbourfront, with the idea that thematically, dramaturgically, it is about the relationship to light, or a future where light becomes a limited resource. So Zeta Ohm is a dance company. It's run by a choreographer named William Young, who you can actually see his back is to the camera here. And this was the idea of taking a look at both these themes of energy, infrastructure, construction, and those became these questions of the aesthetic of this. We called it a few different things: tusk, spike, tree, etc. This designed object, this piece of set, in which the dancers were interacting with and lit up in any number of ways. It's also completely part of the goal of this project was to bring it completely off grid, so that it was entirely renewably powered through that solar that you saw outside. The performance dates were the first few days in March of that year. And so there's all set up in late February. So part of the thinking around our place here, in opposition to the previous project, in which we're looking at the desert during, well, it's in April, but later in the year in Southern California, and we're looking now at Southern Ontario, while it is still winter and there's snow on the ground and we have less daylight. And how do you then create a project in which your priority is around this sort of ethic of we don't want to consume any energy that we can't actually produce ourselves? How do you meet that goal within these conditions that you're setting up for before? And so it's again about marrying that engineering or not. Now, the projects that I work on are not always about this level of engineering. I do love a good project like this. I love feeling like I'm a bit of an inventor. I also do a lot of work in the project that I sort of want to swing us to as we talk about place and our relationship sort of more emotionally, mentally, psychically with it, as opposed to the engineering aspect to it. It's still an important component with it, tends to be around the use of mixed reality or just media in general. A lot of what you're going to see, and I just want to take a slight diversion in it to sort of explain what you're going to see, it tends to use, we refer to it as mixed reality. Depending on who you ask, if you work in VR and you just happen to be doing this, some people will argue that it is or isn't, but we would do a lot with 360 video and photography, in which we're able to capture a full space, right? And so the way that this works is that you'll have a camera that will take multiple synchronized lenses on it, and then sort of like a world map, it creates a projection of it where it takes that sort of sphere, that video sphere of information, and flattens down so we can move it around. But what that means is that you can also we also use things like augmented reality that I'll show you in a moment, but in early days we'd use this where we'd be recording specific times and places, and then someone would be able to, primarily we're having people use mobile devices, not necessarily headsets in it, because what we'd want to do, as you'll see in a project in a moment, is have people think about a place in multiple ways. This is just a test that we were doing with somebody's video installation here in Toronto. And what we use this for, and I realize you're going to be able to hear some of the noise in the background here. Mute that. What you're seeing here is actually that same video put onto, at the time, a phone that's loaded up and then has been oriented to that space. So what we're trying to explore, or one of the things, this is a simple example of what this exploration looks like connected to technology, in which we're looking at places that change over time, or places that can just change, that you can change how you experience that individual place over time, or how over time you are in different places, and how can you bring those things together, and what sort of stories emerge from that. So in putting that into a project, as an example, in 2017 designed an app that would guide somebody through the city of Edinburgh. It was done during the Edinburgh Festival, and then another version of it during a festival in New York called the Future of Storytelling. auto advance snuck back is still on this slide, in which an application that we built would guide people to different parts of the city to experience different of scenes filmed in that way. What would normally happen then is that these various types of immersive scenes, some of them video, some of them audio, would be unlocked so that you were standing in the same place from which they were recorded from, with the idea that what we wanted to have happen, strangely that picture moved in the slide, things are supposed to line up, would allow you to then take a look, so that we were hoping that you would look through the look at the screen and would act as a lens to another point in time. Now, how this is not always done. This was ultimately a play about first contact, like a first contact story. So it was about migration, leaving a place without any idea that you could come back, but told through a science fiction story, and rooting in the place where the festival is happening, so that it feel that there was a sense of immersion for the audience and the users of the device as they were exploring the city. They would see this city, the story emerge through the various sites. There's also some live things you can see in a picture here. There's some live work that was site specific that's happening as well, so that we're bringing in some reality of the story, creating another story. Now, this is speculative. And a lot of the work that we've done actually over the past has also been very community oriented. So back here in Toronto, a project that we've worked on for years, it's technically not through, we could always come back to it. It sort of has had multiple concentrations, 3 or 4 times of activity, is this project called Parkway Forest. Or Parkway Forest VR, in which we community members in various configurations. It started as primarily youth oriented, so we were I think the average age has been 10 years old for it, but it opened up during the pandemic. We started it in 2018, where we would do essentially storytelling in VR, like 360 filmmaking workshops, really just orienting people on how to use the cameras, and then have people create stories. They could be fictional, they could be real, they could just share something with us. Some of them tell about people's experiences in the park, etc., just tour us around, to essentially map the community through how people's experience of this space through the way that they recorded it and shared it with other people. The intent being that the way you can sort of tell from the pictures to the side here that Parkway Forest, sort of different from a lot of parks in Toronto, is relatively open. I'm not sure if anybody here is familiar with it. Has a lot of playing fields associated with it as well. So when it's not being used, when you're not playing a game, when you're not transiting across it, when you're not doing something in the park, oftentimes what exactly its program is or how people use it is unclear. But it's also, as an enclave within Toronto, that's kind of reflective of the entire city. It's a little cut off. It's got like the DVP on one side, it's at Don Mills, and so there's some major streets. It has established, long-standing tower communities. It's close to, I think it's a Seneca, I'm going to say it's a Seneca College campus. So you have students who are going to Seneca who are based there. You have a few different landing communities as well. Enclaves of established newcomer communities in which are coming to have people come for the first time, and to be welcomed in, to build that sense of community that they're in there. There's new, and you can see in an early version of 2018, this building is not complete, luxury condos because it's on a subway line. There are also detached homes, semi-detached homes. So it's a real intersection, and people use the park in different ways at different times. And so the purpose of this project was exploring what are the stories that we tell each other about how it is. You can see it over multiple years too, that you start to see the emergent way in which people use it, that this open space, that you can't even tell the difference between where the school, which is the blue part, and the park really ends. There's a community center that ends up being brown on the map because it's not technically part of the park. How these things come together, and then you can see this public art piece next to the tower on the right-hand side, and then each of the colors moving down then become a different year of activity. You can see the concentrations of activity, and you can start to see emergent story. And if you were to look at these, you'll see that there is the replacement of a playscape that really activates this bottom part of the park, right? That really brings a lot more people there, where there's lighter activity in the playscape and community center up here as well. And then in the middle year, which is sort of here, you see it more spread out, where there's a lot of was a lot of activities more spread out with social distancing. That was the year when everything was closed down. So we were able to go from year one, everything in person, and then partially, and the new playscape. You start to see the story of this community engage in a creative way. There's another example of it, which I'll show one of the videos from, called From Weeds We Grow, which was in the Roundtree Mills Park, which had a number of different community engagement activities which are then mapped through a web app that if you search for From Weeds We Grow, you can pull it up. And there's no audio on this, but each of these stops, we had a lot of community members recording, and I've got the captions on because the video actually has no audio on it for the pre-recorded version of it. I was talking about the relationship, and then they would select a place in which we would work with them to create just this one establishing shot. Here I'm dragging it around, which similarly would pull people between. This work has extended so that we're working now with more augmented reality with it, just as phones, especially where we don't have to have people download apps, which is usually a barrier to access happening. So this is some AR dance content that's in the, if you've taken a train out of Union Station, you'll be familiar with this place, which we were just running a test. If you've got your phone handy and you want to.
And a new page will open up,
You don't need
and you want to press
Alan's
allow.
here, but if I start at the where'd my QR go? It's somewhere in this video. This was used in a dance piece that's there. For whatever reason, I can only see it in the preview of it, but I was in an invite to open it up.
Will open up, and you
But we
want to
don't need the
press
audio here as well. In which we're creating, you can see sort of what the interaction is like with the content in the studio as we were working on this project, right? And so we're bringing more of this place-based understanding. Now, getting out into places that are farther afield, and when we start getting into the ethics of this, it can get really interesting. So I'm starting with this image. This is the Manchester Cable Station. It's in Manchester, California. It is perhaps the most western point in the continental United States. So it's also where the cable that connects the internet between the US and Japan and US and Hawaii, because there are undersea cables that are transmitting that data in addition to satellites, it's where it comes to land. So it's part of the backbone infrastructure of the internet, right? And it is sort of this beige building on the coast. So you can see the beach back here. Now it is also not that far off from this neighborhood, which looked like a real neighborhood. And you can see the distance here, but that's the Point Arena Manchester Band of Pomo Indians. It's reservation land in Northern California. And it calls into question, it's about 6 kilometers apart. It's the largest, closest community. There's a few people that live between these 2 points, but it doesn't necessarily they don't have ubiquitous broadband. Like it's brought as a utility to the reservation, and then a reservation as being sovereign land in various aspects. It's problematic to declare that it is just such. Doesn't necessarily have that distributed throughout those houses, despite the familiarity of its construction looking like, why wouldn't it, right? So a project that we had been working on for a while was called Groundworks. It was working with a number of, this is the collaboration I mentioned before. So that is at the Point Arena Manchester Band of Pomo Indians. One of the collaborators on this project called Groundworks is Bernadette Smith, who's enrolled in that tribe, and she is an advocate for traditional food systems. So also in the idea of places changing and your relationship to places changing, they haven't moved, they've been put into reservation land, but the land around them has changed because one of the staple foods for millennia had been the acorn and acorn meal from the tan oak tree, which has a symbiotic relationship with redwoods. That's called the tan oak because it's really useful in tanning of leather. That's now moved to a synthetic project, so it's not farmed for that anymore, but it was very aggressively cleared for that purpose in the late 19th into the 20th century. It no longer does that, but it cleared out the stalks. It allowed redwoods to grow, and those are now commercially grown as well. But because of that lack of balance, it's caused a different relationship with it. And there are also, through globalization, been infectious diseases impacting the tan oak tree specifically, causing a disease or resulting outcome of a disease called sudden oak death, which is very hard to mitigate. It's sort of a tree cancer, if you will, which is contagious and moves back. And the reason that, and part of this also gets into then questions of land management, because you'll see here, this is the Point Arena Air Force Station. It's a decommissioned Air Force station, so there's no activity there anymore. But strangely enough, in a lot of military installations, at least in the United States, because their priority is around training, et cetera, they have barracks, et cetera, but the commercial impacts of forestry haven't made it onto that land. So it's one of the few areas where effectively they've unintentionally protected the relationship between these two trees, that then get into this relationship of this indigenous community to specifically the acorn as part of it. And what we're doing here, this is one of these 360 cameras, a more professional one, where Bernadette is also, you see in the upper left, and you'll see a little bit later, is creating dance work around it. How are we creating work around it and sharing these ideas and expressing them beyond me explaining it to you here? Also within that project, this is at the top of a Kanimota, or Mount St. Helena, which is its colonial name, outside of Santa Rosa, California. You can see some of the fire damage from one of the earlier Sonoma wildfires here. It is also, and here we are at the peak, a longer shot here. Those are the same people from a different perspective. It is a sacred mountain to the Onotsatis around, as well as other communities surrounding the area, in part because it is the highest peak in the area, but also for commercial purposes and its colonial usages, it is also a communications tower. So again, consultation within land use and contemporary uses becomes part and parcel of how we talk about that space and what are the stories we tell for it. You have to take about a 2 to 3 hour hike up to this peak from the road. It's a lovely hike that we all went on together. But there's traditional ways of approaching it that have been effectively erased. You have to know that they're there, but they become key parts of different types of infrastructure. Again, telling the stories of how we interact with this land. What we ultimately did with this is a few different things. One was, and it's been in the news lately too, so it's interesting to bring it up. One was to create a site-specific work bringing together multiple communities on Alcatraz. Alcatraz has since been commissioned as a federal prison, for the time being apparently, was occupied in 1969 and then for 18 months by Indians for All Tribes. And the American Indian Movement, which is one of the things that redefined U.S. federal relationships, nation to nation, between First Nations and the federal government. It has since been protected partially for ceremony, also part as a migratory bird sanctuary by the National Park Service, in redefining that relationship to maintain its access to it, despite everything. If you've seen in the news, it's around actually turning it into a prison again, which is kind of ridiculous if you've spent time with it. But there is a sunrise ceremony at least twice a year on Thanksgiving or Thanksgiving Day, and then what is now Indigenous Peoples Day in California. This was during the first one. And so these stories were put together, and then also you can see some projection and videos that were brought in to people who were coming before sunrise to see these stories that are not here in this gathering place. Now, some of the videos I have in here, it's whether or not they decide to cooperate, or some of those 360 ones. Sometimes they don't like to, so I'm just gonna move on from them as they're not gonna cooperate. It's always a question of whether or not these ones want to. That's why I pre-record the other ones as well. But there's a sample of the 360 videos that have come out of this, of different land usages that then got mapped as well. Where will stop for a moment is to just show one of the outcomes of this was a documentary for television that was built mainly because the pandemic prevented us from doing site-specific work for a while. And that should work just fine, because it always does. And I'll show that. That's just about 3 minutes long. Come on, buddy. You can do it. Or not. I might bring it up later. And there we go. Come on. You can do it. Here we go.
What does land back to Indigenous peoples truly mean? What does it mean to restore a right relationship of Indigenous land stewardship, management, and acknowledging the Indigenous pedagogies of place-based knowledge? Land back is so much more than handing over a deed. It means restoring, acknowledging layers of accountability.
Groundworks project was really about sharing their stories. What are the things that are exciting to them to share? And I think that's a different perspective than a lot of people approach Native peoples. I get a lot of times people will approach me and they'll say, you know, we have 15 minutes to do this thing. We want you to just come and acknowledge the land. You got 15 minutes. And I'm like, why don't you ask me what I want to do? Like, you're inviting me to your space. Why don't you ask me what I want to do in your space and if I want to be a part of it, first and foremost.
Time is the universe, birth to us all.
And my biggest thing is when we get these things back from museums or however we acquire them, it's one thing to have them on a display, but it's another thing to actually put these back into use. And I think the ancestors that see us doing this, and you know, they live, I think, in these things. You know, the woman that used this for years and years and years, put so much time into these things, her spirit is still in these, you know. And I think when we use them and reawaken that, it will bless us in ways that we haven't yet been able to experience.
There's Alcatraz and then there's Standing Rock. That Alcatraz deeply affected my life and the direction of my life. And I had never known people like us to stand up and to, you know, to demand things, you know, to demand what is ours. And that was the huge catalyst for me, that moment. Everyone talks about, you know, we must rise, we must rise. We have risen. You know, it's not we must, we have. And now what are we going to do about it?
My grandmother and my mother believe that when song, ceremony, and dance stop, so does this earth.
So there's a full-length version that, like, it's an hour-long documentary that went well with it. I'll mute this and play in the background. This is a video from some of the behind-the-scenes footage as well. It started as a project that was entirely about going around and trying to create the immersive media experiences they had. The pandemic, as it changed many things, also changed how we were to approach that. See that that's not as important as us keeping moving. It's nice to talk over it though. That it was really about you know, looking at how we were restoring our relationship to these places. A number of the projects that we've also engaged with recently, and I just came back from the Asia Pacific Dance Festival where we're talking with artists from, well, they're Fijian, but everybody's sort of dispersed as well, is that how are we documenting traditional forms or contemporarily inspired, which is a lot of what you're seeing in Groundworks, that have connections to these traditional forms in an indigenous context, which, you know, then intrinsically ties it to land when that land is under threat, and what that access looks like. This is the headline from a news article that was looking at that relationship between the Point Arena Reservation and the landing of the global internet infrastructure next to it, how those things don't always line up, and then what are the stories there, and how they include or exclude people. Sometimes these things manifest in interesting ways. One of the associate producer, and not seen, I think, you might have been able to see her in some of the frames in the trailer there, but it's definitely present for everything, was a woman named Tashina Parker. I don't speak about her in the past tense she's not in the past tense, the project is. She's alive and well. This is actually her as a child, as her grandmother, who is a storied basket weaver and the Yosemite Valley floor, she's Sierra Miwok, is presenting a basket to Queen Elizabeth. So this is, dug this out of the archives at some point, which is interesting because here's this very specific story in relationship to the land and people who've been displaced, etc., especially like you've got, you know, colonial power right next to the people who have been displaced and their children exchanging gifts within a formal colonial area. They're in Yosemite here, so during your visit. And then at the same time, you have things like this. This is a picture I took in the ROM here in Toronto. This is item 12, our coiled wedding basket from Pomo culture. Everybody that you saw in that, or both Jessica and Tashina, who you saw there, could probably, if given enough time with this, be able to identify the fact that it is not identified by who is the maker of this, but as one of the keepers of that tradition, Julia Parker, who's presenting the basket there, is probably knew the person because of her age and when this was created, probably knew the person or knew, like by one more degree of separation, who would have created this basket, because she is on one side Pomo, and it's a relatively tight community, but it is therefore unlabeled here in Toronto. There's a story that's missing about the relationship to the place, which is created in this way for specific reasons. It's created this way to carry specific things. In this case, it could be a gift of acorns. It's a wedding basket, so it's usually done for a gift as opposed to like long-term storage. And the way that it's created is around a storytelling technique. There's elements of story within the patterns that are in it as well. But that's lost here in the way that it is presented behind glass in Toronto at the ROM. This is indicated in here, and I don't expect you to be able to read this, but there's indicated in coming into this session also that we're talking about ethics here. So we've talked about a lot of different ways that you can already approach land and come to it. But I also want to talk about something that's less exciting, which here is the 6-page contract that existed between us, Toaster Lab, the people who are doing these media recordings, and the communities that we're working with to do the documentation around it. And I've got a co-written chapter about this coming up soon in a book from Regina Press, actually, that Taiwo, who we saw at the beginning, is the editor of, around appropriation. One of the challenges is and something to consider if you're creating work within North America, so US and Canada primarily, that the copyright laws that we have default to providing the rights to a work to the creator of it. That if you record something, you own the copyright to that. You can. So that means that if you're a documentarian and somebody allows you to record them, that you own the rights to that footage. This document and the 6 pages are about community care, and then preemptively devolve the rights back to the community. So it essentially gave all the footage from everything back to the community. And this actually ended up being the thing that got talked about from element to project most, because it came in and it very clearly stated our intentions of working in an ethical way, in a way that we, through a Western legal framework, created a contract that released our rights that we would have had otherwise. So it wasn't just an agreement, it wasn't based off our relationship exclusively, but we wanted to reinforce that in a way that we were able to bind ourselves within the dominant systems in which we were working for that. And so how that was developed and the responsibilities that everybody had to it, it did make it harder. So coming back to the documentary, which we didn't know that we were making at first, that was a pivot that we made, and we had to create more things. We actually had to go back because to be able, it was broadcast on television in the US and PBS in November of 22. And so the distributors needed the rights for it locked. In this document, somebody could pull and say, I don't want to be participated at any time. And so we had a lot of back and forth. That's probably one of the longest part of that production, wasn't actually making it, but creating the ethical framework in which we worked, which was like, okay, once we have a final version of it, that is the exact length that it needs to be 56 minutes and 46 seconds, we need to have an exclusive right to be able to include the footage in it for this period of time, not indefinitely, in specific formats, and that had to be a conversation that we had to have. We couldn't just say like, oh, we created this footage so we can do what we want with it. And people worked forward in good faith. Like we were able to continue to work on the film while this was sort of being figured out on how to do. But that was also part of the good faith because we were able to have this relationship ahead of time. So the ethical part of doing the work is not just how you tread on the land and your relationship to the land, but then the relationships and the constructs that you then create in the way that you assign rights or not. Sort of the last sort of example before getting into, I have a short film that I want to share, feel we're getting time, and then I want to set you off on an exercise that we may come around to as we get to time as well. Also happy to answer questions in that time as well. This is some more, this is a landscape. This is what that flat 360 footage looks like. This is a 360 recorded shot, but it's being shown as flat, so it is a full panorama. This is on Maria Island off the coast of Tasmania. These are the fossil cliffs. They're known for having lots of fossils on them. It's a very interesting place for it. This is a piece of footage also from Maria Island that some collaborators, I was involved in it, but are using Mylar emergency blankets sort of scenically turn themselves, sort of trying to capture the wind in the landscape. There's a picture here, and then I'll show you a short video of it. Maria Island also used to have a concrete factory on it, and all that's left of it is silos. Here we are climbing up into the silos, and there's this video which you'll be able to hear, but I just had people sort of like singing into the silos and then trying to get to this idea of ghosts by subtracting the recording from the reverberations for it. So if I could, it won't let me. There we go. Jump ahead. This sort of like unearthly noise that you're hearing for it is there's 4 silos, so we re-recorded it over and over again into each silo, and then subtracted the original and just took whatever the noise was at the end as the initial bit. And so we've been doing this work in remote places. This is a remote place that doesn't have cellular service, and we're using things with data. This is a project, I don't know if this video is going to show, but this is a project in which she's sitting on top of these stumps in a park that used to be an amusement park in Prague for an international festival where people don't necessarily have data. And then this video is a 360 video of that root structure. So it's what she's seeing inside of it as well. I'm not going to linger on it if it's not going to cooperate with us. And pull it down off the internet. But similar to the other 360 footage that you've seen, you can move around and it's use some of the audio of having a camera in a place where humans can't access. So this is connected to this idea of recalculating route. Also in the type of work that we're doing is what do we do when people don't necessarily have access to data infrastructure with things. This turned into a workshop in which we were using like 360 cameras. This is just some fun trick photography associated with it to explore disused spaces around Prague again 4 years later and to find non-human perspectives. So in this case, we've got from the perspective of a snail here. And try and change different ways of changing our perspective. The way that this project came together was that it was for a project called the Climate Change Theater Action, in which there are short plays. One of them was in conservation with a tree. So the group of people participating, this is just moving to the footage, went and recorded the dialogue by sticking the camera and microphone into a pond next to a tree. I don't think there's any audio on this, but you can sort of see things floating about in it. This is the camera then doing that sort of tiny planet view, which this is the pond, and so there are people there. If I zoomed in, you'd be able to see them. And then this was used as opposed to creating experiences like I've shown before in which they're technologically motivated because we were saying that they're going to be analog. We actually worked on creating things and inspired by this relationship that we created and might have explored through technology through an analog way. So what you're seeing here is like a rack with a bunch of these different tubes on them. This is a woman named Sarah Mosier looking at them. You can see a close-up of them here, but they're cardboard tubes that have, they're also working with reuse. They have a label on them that has part of the script and instructions on how to find a tree and what to do with them. And allows you to listen in or look at them in a way that's meant to, in an analog way, recreate that perspective that we didn't have before. So this is an example of that. Sort of like how can we do that versus this, what we were at before, and trying to create, how do we recreate these experiences? They're facsimiles, of course. They're not exactly the experience. And this also isn't an experience that without the mediation we can necessarily have as well. But those sort of abstract things that we're working with. I want to sort of close us off with information with a film called Teneo, which is Kiribati for mother, which is about someone that is a forced leaving, but now that that's happening, there's erosion around Kiribati. It's probably one of the first Pacific islands that will be erased from the map due to sea level change. It's eroding a lot. And the filmmaker, Rosemary Burns, her mother, is Kiribatese, her father is English, and he was doing a project there, and they fell in love and had a daughter, and since she had relocated to the UK, and ultimately the film is a little bit about memory. So I'm going to share that, and when we come to the end of that, I'm going to set us about on an exercise for as much time that people want to spend as they want, or if they want, or if there are questions, we'll close out there too. So here we go. It's only, I think it's about 6-7 minutes long. It's 8 minutes and 45 seconds.
To other people, she's known as Marista Burns. Before she met and married my dad, she was even Marista Anoka. Here are a few things to know about my mum. Dancing. My mum is the best mover I know. Playing cards. She can obsessively play for hours on end until she wins. Singing. She loves to sing, but especially while playing her ukulele. Cold weather. She grumbles her way through each English winter, losing out to her scratch cards, or she calls them her bingo cards.
Oh, bingo!
Grey hair. It always upsets her when her roots start showing. And finally, the thing she hates the most is change. Despite living in the UK since 2000, she's never wanted to cook British food. Mum is from a tiny group of islands called Ding. That's pronounced Kiribati. Let's say it together one more time. Kiribati. Kiribati has a population of over 100,000. It's made up of 32 atolls and one raised coral island. The islands are located in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, halfway between Australia and Hawaii. According to scientists, Kiribati will disappear under rising sea levels in the next 30 to 50 years. Kiribati is so remote from England that when I last visited, it took over 23 hours to get there, flying from London to Los Angeles, then on to Nandi, Fiji, where I took one last plane to the capital island, Tarawa. With Kiribati being located so far away, it could be so easy to think, who cares? But I suppose the thing is, Kiribati, it matters to me. For me and my family, Kiribati is my mum's homeland. It's where her family live, where my parents met, and where I was born and lived for the first 6 years of my life. Since leaving Kiribati, my mum pretends not to miss it. Do you miss your friends and family? Is that the one thing you miss about Kiribati? Despite her denials about homesickness, one of her favourite things to do is to watch an old VHS. No matter how many times she watches, the video remains the same. Me appearing in the bushes, playing at being camera shy. My mum smiling at the end of the shot. Fishermen casting their nets. And the waves lapping along the beach. The very same beach which is threatened by rising sea levels. Over the years, I've repeatedly asked my mum the same question. What do you think people, the governments in the world, what do you think they should do to help Kiribati? What do you think they should do?
I don't know
What they can do to help?
Yeah. Maybe she going to Fiji or New Zealand or Australia.
But what I'm saying, Mum, is it shouldn't come to that. Kiribati should still be there. My poor mum. I'm constantly pestering her to the point of interrogation. Questions I don't have answers to.
Well, what do you think about Kiribati when they see coming up? What do you think about she staying in Kiribati or she going where?
I don't know, Mum. That's the problem.
Why
I
you
don't
always
know.
ask me about that? It's not what are it?
I just think because you are from Kiribati and you spent most of your life in Kiribati, unlike me, it feels like Kiribati means something different to you than it does to me. So that's why I always ask you what you think about Kiribati disappearing, because it means something completely different for you. It was during this interview I had an epiphany. All these years, my mum and I had been talking about two different things.
There are some people, only some dive tournament, the Samoa, I see that I don't know
Yeah, but that's the thing. Tsunami is different from...
The different with the sea coming up.
Yeah, because tsunami is a natural disaster that happens instantly.
Yeah.
Whereas global warming and potentially the sea rising is something long term. It doesn't happen just overnight.
Where she going? They staying in Kiribati or she going anywhere?
It suddenly all became clear in the interview. My frustrations with my mum's opinions on Kiribati's fate suddenly made sense. It's not that she doesn't care, it's just been a case of crossed wires. So imagine if my mum living in the UK is confused. What must it be like for people living in Kiribati?
She wanted to die in Kiribati.
I think what makes me sad is one day in the future I hope to have children, and I want to be able to take them to their grandmother's home island, and maybe there'll be nothing to show them. If scientists are right, maybe a whole nation will have to be relocated, and only a few people will remember this stretch of sea that was once Kiribati. So, let this film be a keepsake, a memento where Kiribati can be forever remembered, frozen in time, where Kiribati matters, not to be forgotten.
Ian, you're mute.
Thank you for saying something. I muted myself just in case. But I agree with that sentiment too. It's like it's a touchstone that I come back to quite a bit, because I think that it also, in a short time, encapsulates a lot of what all these other things are doing. Is that we have these specific relationships to place. We're in different places and move around for a variety of reasons, forced and chosen, to the extent that we feel that we are choosing them for various reasons. They have their biases, they have their ways that they work, they have their external influences. And how do we capture that feeling and that moment as well? What I want to do now, and I may stop sharing a bit, and I can put this in the chat as well, is actually in one of the exercises that a lot of the people from the Groundworks project did as we moved into our pandemic work, where we were meant to go on tour with a version or a piece related to the site-specific work on Alcatraz, which was done in October of 2018. We have then been working for the year and a half after that to prepare a related piece and a related experience for the lobby that looked at a lot of that immersive film to tour, and all that got canceled. So we moved things online, and what's interesting about that company is that there's a number of Indigenous collaborators in it, and they're from all over. So we had 3 countries, including somebody who has spent the time in Auckland, New Zealand. Oh, this still has the green screen note. I thought I caught the green screen note there, where we had acquired green screens and sort of set everybody up so that we were doing, at the time, as it was popular, a dance performance in which we designed it with the idea that everybody was in different places and we're still connected. And how do we do these connections virtually in the way that we hadn't before? And there were a lot of other conversations that went in that too. But at some point in trying to create instead of like finding specific background footage and literal things, we came up with a list of ways that we would identify sort of place. And so sort of how I wanted to close out was in prompting to have you do something similar, because it was all meant to be stuff that could be done locally, because we couldn't get very far afield. Now we had some time in between, and you can interpret these however you want. You can find a green screen if you want. But through these 7 prompts, it was around sort of documenting where we were in that time. And it could be a very simple thing. If it's something that you're not able to do in this moment, I will also stick around so that we can converse about what we've seen as well. But and I'd said that I wasn't sure where it would go. Like, I put it in here because part of me, after showing all this, is just like, wants to encourage you to document where you are right now, and you're thinking about home and thinking about things that are around it that are things that you might miss otherwise, and just spending the time doing the work to document it, like work or pleasure to do it, so that you have that sort of moment document, and that could be the extent of it. I thought that we could also come back and share it if we have time and if you feel so inclined, but I don't want to make that a requirement of it either, especially landing, and this especially was important to me as we land with Tuneo as well. And that film and its impact there, of thinking about what are the things that we will retain from the places that change, that we leave, and either physically or not, especially within the context of climate. So I might take this down so we can go back to screens and you can see me larger again and put it into the chat that's there, and happy to continue to converse, but also happy to not load you with too much more information as well. But if you do want to step away to capture any of this or share it later, and I don't know, Michelle, there's an opportunity to find a repository for that associated with what everybody's doing asynchronously and otherwise in documentation as it might go forward. I think it'd be interesting to share, because it starts to tell a story of your relationship to your place, and what things you may or may not be paying attention to with it that may or may not become important to you in the future. So yeah, I'll move that to the chat. You don't have to see text on screen. But otherwise, yeah, open to questions, comments, statements, sort of had a flexible end time as well. Hi, Judith.
Hi. I I think that this is amazing and wonderful, and I don't know. I feel like it's kind of ironic given that we're online right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I feel like your work is especially prevalent in kind of grounding us and people and um, in general, and I feel like that's kind of an omnipresent issue despite climate change. But it's just it kind of the internet or like I guess the imagined communities, they kind of define our worlds and they're not really tangible. And yeah, I just really wanted to say how much I really admire and enjoy your work for just making things like our environment and climate change and just in general, just our surroundings more tangible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's something that we lost a lot of, and we get really dissociated with the infrastructure. I don't know if you're also seeing the like even just the variety of pictures that are coming into the chat as you're talking to, that there's this like just comparing some of the views out the window right now and our relationship to those places and stories.
Yeah, I went on a walk with my dog during the lunch break, and this is a picture I took. So of of the park next to my house. So yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. Thank you.
And I'll share. I can also share a link at some point to the project that came out of this, where we ended up then using all of the images for different things. There's a lot about water. Okay, Lisa, where are you? Are you in Florida? In the Gulf Coast? Someplace with large reptiles.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I am actually from Guyana.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and this is at on campus at our university.
One of the things I love about this too is that I've been on sabbatical this year, so I've been traveling a bunch, and the prevalent like what are the I refer to them, and this is my North American bias showing, but I refer to them like what are the squirrels? What are the local things that are there? And like it was in Brisbane, and it was um, Australian water dragons were just like squirrels. So like everywhere they're just like large like iguana sized lizards that are everywhere that you become accustomed to of like that's the local fauna that's there. So seeing that of it's a propagator or like I'm not my field of specialty or a caiman or what have
Yeah, it's
you,
a
but
caiman.
yeah,
Yeah.
that it's just like you get used to being around like we see squirrels all over the place in like open space in Canada. And then like I said, I was at the Asia Pacific Dance Festival and it was in Honolulu and it's all birds. Um, like the birds are very squirrel-like. Like there's the other creatures that might be going for the squirrels are not there. So it's like what are the it's one thing to see landscape, but I love seeing um, a critter, for lack of uh, some local fauna in it. When you start to rethink that, it's like this is like there's a whole different set of circumstances and evolution and migration that's moved people around. Thank you for sharing that, Lisa. Felipe, where are you? Where are you? 'Cause that's right now. What time is it?
Is it around like 9
Oh, okay.
p.m.
Yeah.
in Portugal?
Okay. Yes, that makes sense.
And I live in a small village, and this is the sky right now. It's getting darker, and it's really calm, and you can like hear the birds, and it's really good. Hear the birds, it's really nice.
Love it. Yeah, it's interesting to see the kind of like just sort of noting like the flora, fauna, even just in these simple things of like starting to see them there. And I appreciate everybody sharing them as well. And it's useful, I think, to even like these simple things. That's what we were doing before, things that we don't notice all the time or we take for granted. Our brains are really good at filtering things out once we become accustomed to them. Um, and so putting them into a different context, and then when we're put into a different context, understanding that, or even if we're not understanding, but having something that connects to memory and place. Huh. I know that view. Yeah, and this might be a Michelle question. I wonder if it's interesting because I did notice that some people had to go, and so we had intended to check back in on it later and um, see the recording. Um, it'd be interesting to see collecting the different perspectives because even now we're just getting different times of day, different focus elements. It's really great.
Yes, I think it's possible. We can do a side project
That's what everybody
during
needs.
the course. Yeah.
I don't mean to like default to the academic priority of creating more work uh, for for them.
Oh, I mean, the summer course participants have a site where all
Hmm.
of the materials are kept, right? So we can certainly create a space there for people who choose to share, and they can just email me the photos, and we can just upload them.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm always one to share material, so I'll make sure that you have the prompt if you want to share it around, so you don't have to go to the end of the video too for it. Yeah, I know that we're in the it's not necessarily a group of artists, or that might not be your primary thing. I also think that referring to people as artists or not as a professional term is always kind of weird anyway, because we're all creative. But I would love to open it up to thoughts about how, like, if there are things in there around in the creative process of creating work and that, because as Michelle, as you had set it up earlier, in introducing it, sort of like the ethics of that creative work and that, if there are things that are um, staying with you, or that with a creative project or not, are things that are curious or things that introduced um, a new perspective of any variety um, for you, or reinforce something that you're already doing. It doesn't have to be new things as well, around like what others have done in terms of as you're developing projects, what types of agreements that you work under. It's the less, exciting part of creating things. You just want to get into it, but oftentimes they make it that much richer. And I'd be interested in hearing other people's experiences um, with setting up the collaborative infrastructure as well, and being responsible for place. And I'll scroll through as people might want to think about that as well.
Do you find that this relationship to place has become a lot more strained? Not just in you know, I guess the indigenous sense, but also in just every person.
I think so. I mean, in highlighting the onlineness to things, I mean that's something where, amongst other things, the constant being online, which is convenient for a variety of reasons and does minimize some environmental impacts, right? In that regard, that sorry, that's my text message. Make sure that I'm on do not disturb. Um, that it's like it's had an interesting impact actually through when we were. It's one of the reasons that we came up with these prompts was because we were all around our homes and having these conversations and not in shared space together. And so, how do we think about all of those things as well? I think Yeah, I think that's part of the reason that I sort of like point to that evolution of infrastructural maps is that we've gone from a very like in an indigenous context, as it is intrinsically related to land, as you have community organized around resources, to like a lot of our interactions are so dissociated from a specific type of place, and that informs a lot of like our thinking, like thinking about the way because the work that I do, I put it in the terms of scenography, like the way that we organize space, the way that we organize our infrastructure sort of talks about how it's intended to be used, how we program it, and for specific types of activities, and how that can sort of bias things as well. And so the same thing happens when we dissociate ourselves from space, that we feel really disconnected to it. At the same time, I think that there's also by moving around less, there's been a little bit more attention to things. But there's also, and I didn't get into the idea of solastalgia, which is this idea of homesickness without leaving home through environmental change, where one of the stressors too is that we've been seeing, and sometimes it's relatively subtle in places that we are really accustomed to. Over time, those have changed as well, and so I think we're feeling there's a lot of unmoored feelings because even when we're still in a place, we're feeling disconnected to it. I've experienced this. I'm originally from Los Angeles. It's gotten more humid there over the last decade. When before I started at York, I lived in Houston for a year, and I had gone to university there, and it was something where we joke where it rained every other day or so. And then when I worked there for a year, it didn't rain at all, and there was a huge die-off of the overhead tree canopy because of the water and the way that those patterns are changing. Then the phrase originally comes from a philosopher, researcher, sociologist named Glenn Albrecht, and working with people in Perth, Australia, which tends to get early, and then he was just noticing a lot of people with this sort of what they would call grief, but had never moved. Like that homesickness. So I think it's created a real complexity. Sometimes it's anchored us, sometimes it's dissociated us, and that's happening at the same time that things are changing around us in ways that we wouldn't otherwise expect from my experience.
Tanya has her hand
Tanya,
raised.
yeah. Go for it. Sorry.
Hi,
I've been there.
thanks. No, I just wanted to say thank you so much for the presentation, and I really appreciated understanding a little bit more about the context of copyright when it comes to creative practice in Canada. When we've done contracts in the Australian context, we always sort of put like intellectual property within the contracts. So yeah, I've been trying to navigate what that means in Canada. It's really confusing as a non-lawyer. So I really appreciated that consideration and sharing. I think you asked something about ethics. I think one of the challenges recently I've been finding when it comes to like working at the intersection of displacement, working with communities, and then working in creative practice is that this question of anonymity is something that we really have to in some instances really tackle the assumption that anonymity equals safety. And especially if we're talking about arts practice and there's a lot of the times, depending on the context, a desire to not be anonymous, because if there's an exhibition going on, young people want to be like, this is me, I want to invite my friends, my family. So I guess I wondered whether this is something that you've had to navigate and how you've done it, and obviously it's case by case. But I've just noted this has happened kind of a bit more recently when it comes to like art-based practice. And then another, I guess, a slightly more selfish question is like, I would love to hear more about your practice in Australia. You referred to Australia a few times. I wondered if you work there. Obviously, that's the context that I'm coming from, so that's just more out of interest.
I can work sort of in reverse, because one's an easier question. One's a practical, easier question too. I have some really close collaborators in Australia, so I also spent like most of the month of March this year, primarily in Brisbane. I was also down in Adelaide for a bit and done some work in Melbourne for that as well. It's really interesting, especially as somebody working within creative practice. There's like a really interesting like as a post-colonial state and context in which to work with a resource economy of a certain age, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of like commonalities that are close enough that there's a really interesting conversation to have, even when it comes to like the different, like trying to unpack the difference between acknowledgement of country and acknowledgement and land acknowledgement, and all the like politics even in the smaller elements of there. So it's there. I am actually in the process of trying to put together a thing where there's a little bit more work. I don't know, where are you based in Australia, if I can ask?
Yeah, I grew up in Melbourne, but I'm currently in based in London, London, Ontario. But grew up in
Oh,
Melbourne,
okay,
yeah.
okay.
No.
Yeah, there's a number of people I work with and I mentioned Brisbane at Griffith, the university there, and there's a performance and ecology research lab that
Yes.
perhaps from looking at the work is obvious that why I might collaborate with them, and that's where Tanya is as well. And we run into a lot of the same questions for that as well there. So that's, yes, that's the answer to that. The practical question is that, yeah, and also because of the relationship to the Pacific, I've ended up just collaborating with a number of people in the Pacific for it, and sort of like thinking of like the liquid continent of Oceania and the Pacific region. That's what I spent the last 2 weeks doing, as I mentioned, through the Asia Pacific Dance Festival for that. So it's interesting both in a practical and also, or like in a practical, someone who works in sustainability because of the acute questions there, and it's much, in many ways, oftentimes much more explicitly tied to climate. It was really interesting. Well, I was in Brisbane. I'm not sure how long it's gonna be up, but there's that like Asia Pacific triennial at the museum there, and the number of approaches to that through the various pieces of work there is really interesting. On the anonymous question, well, that's super interesting. So yeah, there's a lot of, because I work in a university, but I also work as a creative practitioner, and like you come at it from opposite sides, especially if you're like put it into a research context around anonymous, and also when it's artistic process, like anonymity is something that we like say in ethics documentation, but it's like, how like do you do that? It's like that's even hard to do when you're just like trying to do like blind peer review and that tradition of things, because it's like you're talking, especially if you're like writing about things that you create, it's so easy, like it is an artifice that you put up there. I think that I don't have a definitive answer for it. It is something that is provided for within the contracts if somebody wants to be identified or not. So it's like a proactive question of how it is. When we were working on the documentary, there was a lot of questions. Like there's artists that you saw that we're working on one part of it, and then like Desiree Harp, who is she's Ono Satis, and she was mainly interested in Kanemota. She ended up not being available to do the performance, but then like the work, but we had worked with her and her mom, Tek, who like teaches traditional making, and she does a lot of workshops there and did a lot with us as well, and they sort of worked their way into what we're doing, so they were very involved in the production process. And she was actually one of, like, for a long time, a focus of the documentary, and then she's like, I'm just not feeling it right now, so we adjusted it. Like, so it's been something where we've followed the lead, and there's a different way of answering, I think, in terms of like public promotion of things versus like the legal agreements for things. So where, because the legal agreements can be really important to not have it for protecting it and making sure somebody's ownership is articulated. But then promoting it, they might not want to be, and then vice versa as well. They might want to. That might be something that's for sharing, and they're not worried about it getting out of community or being taken out of context in the same way. But they really want to be identified as the person doing it, because then they also have like their own professional career ambitions. And I guess we just like have the conversation. Like there's not. I think it all comes down to like, what is the relationship, and then can you articulate that relationship? Like, can you codify it so that like you go beyond saying like, we agreed to this, we're going to shake on it, to, and that's why we have 6 pages that undo something that requires no pages in North America, right? We have 6 pages that's like, here are our responsibilities to each other and how we're going to treat everybody, and who's going to protect the data and all those things, so that we're explicit about it, and then we can change it if we need to. But that we reinforce the trust with documentation. Yeah, but it all starts with that. Like I don't, none of it came, like all that came, any of the forms or that we work with actually are built together. So it's not like we come into a community. It's like, here's the form that we use. Please sign when you get to the end of it. It's like, here's what we've used before. Let's sit and talk about it. You know, it takes a lot longer. I'll tell you that much. But time and talking to people. That's our approach to anonymity. And because I need that amount of time to actually say the word anonymity. I don't know if that's helpful, but yeah.
And if you wouldn't mind, I have a follow-up question. And this is the last
I say go for it.
Because sometimes, so artist researchers struggle like works that are independent, and then kind of the works that are under the banner of the university where they might be based
Yes.
at. So with these forms that you're mentioning, are they separate forms if they're sitting in the two different sites, or like do you converge them? Has there been some
Oh,
tension?
they converge
Yeah.
in part
Okay.
because I don't know how to do it otherwise.
Yeah.
And it made me think of, and now I'm looking like, I don't know if I have the book with me, but like a fight that I've gotten into with academic publishers is around authorship because I so if in doing something, putting it into a research contest, this is actually, I think, pretty explicitly in that 6-page document, is that sometimes we will have academic outputs for it because we also had like some SHRC funding that was helping me participate in it too. And have figured out how to, like, in the Canadian context, these acronyms will not, nobody will care about them outside the Canadian context, like how to delicately tread the line between like SHRC funding and council funding because they don't like them to converge at the federal level. But then when it comes to authorship, like I don't think, even though I might be the lead writer, like the person typing, essentially doing it, like the work doesn't exist without all of us. So there's been a couple of chapters that we've put out about these projects, and I will have a fight with the publisher to make sure that, like, even if somebody just danced in it, if they were a creative collaborator, that they are listed as one of the authors of the paper. They all review it too for it, but then like that becomes a big part of, like, so they converge in my mind because they can't exist without each other. Like I can't write about the things that we're working on. Like we have a chapter on the groundworks process in the Rutledge something of digital environmental humanities, and all of the key collaborators are listed as co-authors on it. And that's part of how we articulate it. It's like, we're going to try and do these things, but we will make sure that everybody is credited. And you know, Rutledge takes issues with that, but then like just like, you already want me to write it for free anyway, so like you might as well just allow me to claim authorship. And so everybody gets a copy in that, and then the project with where the prompts came from, something in a book called Pandemic Plays, which is all about stuff that got put online. And yeah, so that's they converge, and then it's about making sure that the credits also converge as well, so that it doesn't like, it's all, I mean, essentially it's just like try not to be an extractive jerk about collaboration.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I will admit that I have actually, I think when Michelle and I talked about this session, I actually like, and we never actually talked about ending. It's just it goes on, so I don't even know what our time parameters are because I can keep going.
With Zoom, it can go on forever, but
yes.
But technically, we booked it until 4:30, so
yeah,
we're
so
almost
okay,
there.
no, we're coming up on that there. So I was like, I don't know. Yeah, I love talking about these things as well for it. Yeah, I'm more than happy to, like, and Tanya, this is for you as much as anybody else because you asked the questions about it. But we try and make available all of the documentation as well. Like, so if you want to take a look at what we put together, it is by no means perfect. Like, it is in an editable format because it should be customized for what it was, and it is totally like the original version of the 6-page contract. It looks very much like stuff around like blood pressure research in Alaskan Native communities because they just had really good language about it. And so we like, you know, there's also the cross-disciplinary part around it as well, is that it's like some people might be doing stuff with data outside of a discipline, outside of the same discipline. And there was an acronym early in the presentation I didn't talk about at all. There's this SHRC project called Sustainability in the Arts, which is about trying to organize scholarship around sustainability in the arts, because it's not like disciplinarily specific, and it's all about just like trying to identify how you actually link things, one, outside of repositories, which need to be officially published through channels, and acknowledging not like other ways of sharing information and other ways of forming knowledge, and knowledge mobilization as things, and then the fact that like the defining factors of what a piece is may have nothing to do with what we define as like dance studies or theater studies. It's like Tashina, who is the little girl in the picture, is also the costume designer on Groundworks, and she has a background in fashion. She does a lot of stuff with now traditional craft related to fashion. And so she did it because he was the person who was like skilled to do it. But as we were having this conversation on the hike down, she's like, "Well, I do costumes for these people because we have a relationship and I have those skills, but I don't identify as such." So then when you go into an area where you're like, "Let's talk about costume design," she would never self-identify as it. Her contributions and her as an example of that. I think also always noting that all of these are constructs made up, divisions, and on the research side tend to bias towards Western frameworks, is like not just like what is the inclusive principle, but realizing that the inclusive framework is also going to be biased. That's another infrastructural thing. Architectures are biased by their creators.
Well, Ian, if you want to share some materials,
Yeah,
you can send
I can send
everything to
everything, the
me, and
deck
then
and
I can
documents
fill
referred to in it along. I think I'm allowed to share my chapters, so I can share my stuff from it if you want to at least see how the authorship works for it or anything else, without getting into any trouble as the delegated author. I think that's one of the official terms that I get, the delegated author. Yes, but I will send those on to Michelle. I'll compile everything together in a relatively sensible way so that you can put it and use it at will.
Oh, see the comment from Tanya Michelle.
Yeah.
Reddit and BuzzFeed.
Yes. So do it. Take pictures of everything. You've got a camera in your pocket all the time. How could you not? There's so much storage. All right. Well, I'll compile that all together and I'll send it your way. That will include my information. If anybody wants to be in touch, I'm pretty easy to find, but it's Garrett, IGARRETT at yorku.ca. Or if you find Toaster Lab, you'll find me. If you find the Center for Sustainable Practice in the Arts, or the CSPA, any of the places in my bio, you'll ultimately find me very easily for it. So I'm happy to follow up on anything or answer any questions, especially, and all that will be included with any of the material I share as well. Oh, there you go. Yes.
Well,
But
thank you
thanks for
very
having
much,
me.
Ian.
The conversation. Yeah, it's been a
That
pleasure.
was extremely interesting, and I'm so happy we did it. We really need to incorporate more art practice and art thinking in forced migration and displacement. I mean, there's so much more to say and different ways to say things. So this was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I hope the rest of that course goes well too.
Mhm.
In a couple days.